But whatever the case is, what we do know is in the culture you and I live in, these churches that are growing, and this is true across all growing churches, kind of across the entire body of Christ. If you find a church that's growing and making impact, one of the things at the core of that is great teaching. They're not phoning that part in. They're not. Right. They're spending time, effort, and energy, resources, staff time. They're focusing on it. They're thinking about it. They're wrestling with it.
I think the whole strategy has to start with that and has to be built around that. Mm-hmm. We've done this multiple years where we do some sort of church survey around Easter or something like that, and for multiple years we've had it on there like, hey, like what's the primary reason that you come? Right. Teaching, community, kids ministry, worship, whatever, and teaching's always number one. Right. And it's like we just stopped asking the question because it's like, and that's the primary reason. So it's like you can not like that or think there's an issue with that, or you could say, man, that is the primary reason that people are coming. Now let me help my people share that.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. It's Pastor Bobby with you today, and hey, today's going to be a really special episode. We have a guest on with us today, Rich Birch, and I'll introduce him in a second, but let me go ahead and introduce our topic for today. So one of the things that you guys know, if you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, one of the things that Breaking Barriers is all about is helping you to grow your church, helping you to grow personally so that you could send more people and make a bigger impact in your church. And a lot of times, for some reason, those two things, growing your church and discipleship, those things have kind of been disconnected. Mm-hmm. One of the ways that I often think about it is, when you read the book of Acts, the beginning of Acts is, Peter preaching that sermon, and you see thousands of people coming to Christ and getting baptized. And then there's kind of a transition in the text, and now it talks about, and they're meeting daily together, house to house, and breaking bread and being generous with one another, and God's adding to their number day by day. Well, for some reason in the church world, the conference circuit, this thing of like, man, reaching people, growing the church is very disconnected from discipleship.
Right. Yeah.
And the question I often ask people is, man, those disciples, you see it in the end of Acts chapter 2, where do you think they came from?
Right.
The only place they can come from is the crowds.
They were there. They were in the crowd. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so to see all the things that we want to see, people growing in their faith and being on mission, and, like at Mercy Hill, we talk a lot about adoption, foster care, and all these different really amazing things. It's like, man, those stories are going to come from the crowds. Absolutely. And to see more of those stories,
100%,
you got to engage more of the crowds.
100%.
And so today, that's what we're going to talk about, how to really create that invite culture in your own church. And for me, when I think about invite culture and the power of it, one of the, I think, transitions we've made at Mercy Hill over the last number of years is obviously pastors, want to see more people reached, and, you want to invite people to your church. You want to see more people come in and getting engaged and all of that. But there's only so many people you can personally invite as a pastor. There's only so many people your staff can invite. Mm-hmm. And to me, the really powerful thing that happens is when that goes from, kind of being your responsibility to the whole church gets it now. Ephesians 4 talks about, the work of a pastor, of a ministry leader, is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry.
100%.
And we have really seen that take off even in the last 3 years as our people get, taking the ownership of, I need to be inviting people, right? Because this is my church. I have ownership here. I'm part of this. And that's when you end up hearing all these stories that are so beyond you. You know what I mean? It's people in your church that are grasping the mission and they're really going for it. And man, Rich has had a huge impact on Mercy Hill. We have known Rich now for 9 years, and he's helped us in kind of multiple different ways, thinking about multi-site. Obviously, we have 5 campuses, but also just thinking about, how to increase that front door of your church, how to engage more people, how to help your people to engage more people. And he actually has a new book, Unlocking Your Church's Invite Culture. So I just want to walk through sort of the meat and potatoes of that. We had Rich here for We did a one-day event through Breaking Barriers today, helping, I think there were 70 people there, 70 church leaders, helping them think about, man, how can they do this in their church? And so I thought it'd be a great opportunity for everybody listening that we can all be thinking about, man, how to actually increase that invite culture. So, Rich, man, thanks so much for being here.
Well, so honored to be here. And I love the story that God's writing through Mercy Hill. I love what's happening here. I love that you're taking a leadership in this conversation and saying, hey, let's try to think about this maybe in a slightly different way and to not kind of fall into this narrative that's a false narrative, this false dichotomy. It's interesting how, like, it's as tale as old as time. I remember when I was in school, my theology prof talking about how discipleship and evangelism is two sides of one coin. And it's like, you got to do both. You can't do just one or the other. But there does seem to be this schism where it's like, you've got those churches that are out there reaching people, and then you've got those churches out there that are building people. And man, we got to be doing both of those. And I love that you guys are taking a fresh spin on this and kind of a very Mercy Hill spin. It feels very resonant to you guys, which just want to honor you in that. I think it's fantastic.
Thanks, man. Yeah, we really appreciate that. Yeah, we have found, for whatever reason, over the last number of years, if you talk about your desire to grow your church, your desire to see more first-time guest baptisms, and if you talk about, man, your church is growing, here's what's happening, people can almost have a skepticism like you're doing something wrong.
Yes. Oh, 100%.
Well, man, they must be, who knows what they're doing there,
Yes.
The lights and smoke machine and
which I don't think was always the
Bible.
case. I think there was a case, and they're probably related. There was an earlier generation where the growing church across town, people assumed, oh, something good must be happening there. And there wasn't always necessarily something good happening there. And so unfortunately that got some momentum behind it. But it is true. I've seen that in lots of parts of the country where it's like there's this skepticism. And it's not so much by people who don't attend church, but by other church leaders or
Exactly.
Other folks who are like, whatever, you guys aren't doing that. And Mercy Hill's a great example of that. I use you guys as an example all the time. Here's a church that's life-giving, wants to see people take steps towards Jesus, has core convictions around the Bible, actually teaches the Bible like in a straight up, man, there's good stuff going on here, but in a gracious way, and has like social outcome, the stuff you guys are doing on adoption, all of that. What a life-giving, amazing thing to see take place. That unfortunately feels rarer than it should. Like you wish it wasn't as rare as it is. But yeah, I think it's just great.
Yeah, a lot of times I think churches get put in camps, and maybe just because there's some truth to this, it's like, oh well, this is the Smoke and Lights church that does great at their Christmas services, and then you got this church over here that's like the discipleship church.
Right.
They're going deep. Their people are going deep, and it's like, man, I feel like we should be doing both.
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
100%. Yeah,
and
definitely.
just having that kind of spirit as leaders. So the best we can. We're trying to hold those things together.
Well, and that even relates to how over the years I've changed the way I talk about invite stuff, where really, and we talk about it in the book, we talk about invite culture. It really is under all of that. It's a discipleship thing. We've got to lead our people to the place that they understand. They clearly kind of get it. There's like a head part of this. There's pieces of this that are resonant within them. But then there's also a heart piece where like they emotionally feel it. They don't just. This is not a marketing tactic. It's not like, oh, we're trying to do this to try to grow our church. No, that's not what it's about. We're trying to invite people to become a part of what Jesus has always called us to do, which is to pass along the message to other people. And sure, invite is kind of the language we use around that, but it's not, although there might be kind of marketing things we use and there's maybe word of mouth stuff we talk about in there, the thrust of it underneath of it is ultimately culture. It's about how do we disciple people, move kind of an entire church's approach to thinking about how we reach people. You can just apply tactics and sure, you'll get one response, but what we see is a church like yours that is trying to drive this deep into people's lives. It becomes exponential at that point because it's not just like another thing that we're doing. It's not just like, oh, this is who we are. This is what it means to follow Jesus. It's that kind of change that ultimately sees the kind of impact that a church like yours is having.
Yeah, well, I think today will be a great episode. We've had so many people reach out to us and basically say, hey, when I started ministry many years ago, I just had such a desire to reach people and grow the church. And for whatever reason down the line, they started feeling bad about that and making to feel bad about that. And so we've had so many people reach out to say, hey, I'm kind of having an awakening in my life.
That's cool.
And,
that's great.
Really going back to thinking about, we need to be thinking about adding people to our church this year.
Right. Yes.
And so hopefully today's episode, I think will really help with that. Let's go ahead and jump in. I love the kind of simplicity of your book. I think anything that's really well done is very simple, and you can really replicate it. And
I'm a simple guy.
I mean, we need that to be able to, for people to have handles, to think about stuff. And that's a lot of what we do with Breaking Barriers, try to just like, man, just give me what it actually is.
Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes people can present stuff in such complexity.
Yes.
You talk about 5, what do you call them?
Gears. I call them gears because there's this idea that they work together.
Right.
They're interconnected with each other, and they're not. Each of them kind of relate to each other. They kind of provide energy to each other. But there are these kind of 5 practices, or what we say 5 gears, that we see time and again in fast-growing churches. Because the difference between what we've seen is the difference between stuck and stagnant churches and growing churches is growing churches train, equip, and motivate their people to invite their friends. So they don't just. It's like specific tactics that they're taking to do that. They don't just like, well, why do people, what will happen? Will people invite their friends? I don't know. It's like, no, they're thinking about it. They're thinking about, what can we do in order to help our people? And so we train them, we help them with the head part of it. We give them information, we help them think about it. We equip them, we give them tools, whether that's actual physical tools, invite cards, great services that people can invite their friends to, social media, that kind of thing. And then motivate. It's the heart piece. We speak to who they are as a human, call them to something bigger than themselves. But you've got to do all of those together. And we've found these 5 are areas that time and again, we see churches that are growing are applying kind of pressure in these areas to add to the invite culture. And there's kind of one click at a time. It's like it takes a bunch of stuff in these areas. There's not a silver bullet to make this happen.
Right. So let's just jump into it. Let's talk about that very first one.
Yeah, shareable weekend teaching. This one's first because it's kind of the biggest deal. It's the one that makes the biggest impact. If I was sitting down with a church and they were saying, yeah, this is all great, where would I start? I would start with shareable weekend teaching. And the reason for this, well, first of all, 75% of the reason why people attend your church is because of what you talk about on the weekend. And we take this for granted, I think sometimes, particularly I think people who speak for a living, like if you're a lead pastor, most of my background's been an executive pastor. I've been that kind of secondary seat in 3 fast growing churches that 2 of the 3 went from less than 1,000 to 3, 4, 5,000 in attendance. And I see it clearly because I don't teach all the time. I think sometimes if you are a teacher, you may not see how important that teaching is. Like it's a big deal. You might feel the weight of it because oh my goodness, every weekend I got to prep a message, or 30 times a year I got to prep a message. But it's the reason why people invite their friends. People, if you were to walk around your lobby this weekend and say like, hey, what do you say when you invite someone to come to your church? Typically, people will say something about the teaching. They'll say, "Oh, you should come because that we talked about this great thing," or "There's this, my pastor said this some amazing stuff on the weekend that I'm still chewing on." So it's important. But we say shareable weekend teaching because we want to position our teaching in such a way that people will want to talk about it with their friends. And so a simple tactic on this front, and if I'm finishing a message this weekend, sometimes we'll talk about like, okay, coming up next weekend, like maybe you're going verse by verse. And so you peek up over the horizon, hey, this is where the passage is going next. Or maybe you're more in felt needs. And like this weekend, you're talking about marriage. Next weekend, you're talking about your kids. But we can make the same mistake. We kind of reference to where we're going, but we don't take time to explain to our people why they should invite their friends for next weekend. Hey, next weekend, we're going to be talking about X. And do you know these 3 types of people in your life who are asking these kinds of questions? Man, they would love to be here next weekend. I'd love to encourage you to invite them to come next weekend. You wouldn't believe how many times I talk to pastors or we talk about their messages and I'm like, you just left me hanging. You like, where are we going? It's I'm a person of a certain age, Gen X. And I remember when I was a kid watching the Batman TV show, the original one. And they would talk about, same bat time, same bat place. There would always be the cliffhanger next time on, and we need that in our teaching. Now that's just one tactic, one kind of thing to think about, but that kind of tells you about the broader strategy, which is, hey, we've got to position our teaching. That's both setting it up in the way we talk about it. It's how we produce flyers and invites, even as something as simple as we're launching a weekend series on, something that's coming up. Let's say you're doing a thing on marriage, like a marriage that lasts. Well, we'll do a video. The people that are watching our content online, those people are connected to our church. So we should speak to them. We should assume that they're coming to the Marriage That Lasts series. Well, that video that we produce, really what it should be saying is, hey, we got this series coming up on the Marriage That Lasts. This is how it's going to help people. And the question we have for you is, who are you inviting to this? Not just, we look forward to seeing you this weekend, or this is going to be great for you. It's always about, hey, who can you invite to be a part of this? So shareable weekend teaching, that's the first, and there's a ton we could talk about there. We could do a whole episode just on that.
Right.
But that's the first area that we talk about in the gears.
Yeah, a lot of I think some of the issue is, like, I don't know if you've heard us say this, but we'll talk about like the anti-church growth movement, which is kind of this spirit of like, man, if you're growing, something's wrong.
Yeah.
I feel like some of the people that have bought into that, it's kind of this idea of like, well, growing churches have this cult of personality with the main pastor or whatever. And it's like, people don't want it to be true that the preaching is the primary thing that attracts people, because for some reason that feels consumeristic or, whatever it may be. And so I think people try to shy away from that.
Right.
And it's like, man, if you don't have all this one-on-one evangelism, all this one-on-one discipleship, then you're doing something wrong. And it's like, I mean, you just read through the New Testament. A lot of people that are coming to Christ and the crowds, it's through situations where people are standing up and teaching and preaching.
100%. Well, Andrew said this on my podcast, and it's like one of those, when someone says something, they're like, I know that, but the way he said that was just so good. And he was talking about how you read the entire book of Acts, and it's like, it's a preacher in a crowd, right? That is where transformation takes place. And the story of the New Testament is the story of a few communicators, right? It's obviously the story of Jesus, but then that gets handed off to Peter, and then you've got Paul. There's Stephen. There are a few of these communicators who have, huge impact on the message of Jesus. And yeah, what would you want them to do? To be less effective? To step back and be like, oh, I'm not going to use the gift? And there is, listen, this is one of those questions I look forward to asking Jesus someday. Because it would appear like the gift of teaching isn't evenly distributed among the body of Christ. And I don't know why that is, right? Why is that? It doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that's widely spread. There seems to be some people that really have this gift and some people don't. I'm not sure why that is, but that would appear to be the case. Or is it maybe the other way around? That's more tells us about our brokenness than the fact of, our gifting. But whatever the case is, what we do know is in the culture you and I live in, these, churches that are growing, and this is true across all growing churches, kind of across the entire body of Christ. If you find a church that's growing and making impact, one of the things at the core of that is great teaching. They're not phoning that part in. They're not. They're spending time, effort, and energy, resources, staff time. They're focusing on it. They're thinking about it. They're wrestling with it.
I think the whole strategy has to start with that and has to be built around that. We've done this multiple years where, we do some sort of church survey around Easter or something like that. And for multiple years, we've had it on there like, hey, like what's the primary reason that you come, Teaching, community, kids ministry, worship, whatever. And teaching's always number one. Right. And it's like, we just stopped asking the question because it's like, man, that's the primary reason. So it's like, you can not like that or think there's an issue with that, or you could say, man, that is the primary reason that people are coming. Now let me help my people share that.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's when I think it begins to really.
Yeah, so that's that first kind of gear, shareable weekend teaching, all about, okay, how are we really positioning? Part of it's like mindset, how we think about it, but then tactics around, it's simple stuff around flyers and, people make fun of me because I still love invite cards. Like I'm, all these years later, I'm still like, I think you should be printing invite cards off and handing them out. And you should give away 2 or 3 at a time. You should get volunteers in to package them up into bundles of 2 or 3 because you're, subconsciously saying to people, no, we want you to invite 2 or 3 people. It's not about inviting one person. I know that not all those end up in the gifts in the hands of friends, but it's a physical artifact to reinforce to people, hey, we want you to invite people. It's important stuff that's coming up.
Yeah, so the second one that you list is eventful big days. And I just want to thank you because we actually use the language big days at Mercy Hill. I'm assuming we got that from you. I honestly don't remember probably how that started or how it came up, but I think this goes back to some of the anti-church growth stuff. I mean, some people don't want this to be true, that their church should double or triple around Christmas or Easter or whatever. It feels consumeristic or whatever it may be. But I'll just say, and I thank you for putting so much good stuff out there. When we put more of an emphasis on this, we directly saw a 1-to-1 kind of result.
Right. That's great.
Somebody challenged us a bunch of years ago. They heard about what our Easter attendance was, and they basically just said, hey, it should be higher than that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I think he could just see, man, a church like yours, like I'm hearing, you know, you guys are saying, oh, you know, attendance goes up by 10% on Easter or 15%. He was like, no, it should be like doubling.
Yep, 100%.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, eventful big days. There are, 3 or 4 days a year that in most churches, 2 things happen. One, your people are more likely to invite their friends, and their friends are more likely to attend. Now think about that. If our church grows because people invite their friends, and there's a few days during the year where your people are more likely to invite their friends, and your people are more likely to have a positive experience when you do that, well, good night. We want to focus our energy ensuring that people are actually inviting on those days, because we know there's some stats that show that only 2% of Christians have invite in any given year. So there's if it's a radical minority of people. And whether that's true or not, there's lots of ways to debate that. What we do know is there's a minority of people in our churches that actually invite, even in a thriving church like this. And so if I take the risk as a person who attends my church to go out and to invite, man, I want to make sure that I'm doing that on a day that my friend is most likely to actually come. And so that's some of the kind of interpersonal dynamics that are driving big days. And it makes sense. Some of it gets back to the teaching thing. For preachers, I know that, and I'm sure it's not the case here at Mercy Hill, but I know that there are some preachers that are like, man, Christmas and Easter, those are hard days. Because everybody knows what I'm going to say. I'm going to get up on Christmas and talk about the incarnation in one way or another, right? And then on Easter, I for sure am going to get up and preach about the death and resurrection of Jesus. And from a preacher's point of view, they're like, oh gosh, I don't know, man. Is it I wish I could do something different on those days. I want something fresh. Mm-hmm. But from our guests' point of view and from our people's point of view, the reason why they invite their friends is because they know exactly what you're going to preach on that day. There's no question in their mind. They invite their friends on Christmas because they know exactly what you're going to teach. They invite your friends on Easter because they know exactly where you're going to go. There's a church in one of my favorite churches in Philadelphia, Epic Church. I don't know if you know these guys. Epic stands for every person in the city, which is a great vision. These fantastic. And they do a day, they have a made up big day, literally called Epic Day. And it's in January every year, middle of January. It's kind of the middle of the month. And every year they give away a t-shirt. They give away these Epic shirts, and they're really cool shirts. And they'll say, listen, we're going to present the clearest presentation of the gospel on that day. This is they tell people ahead of time, this is exactly what we're going to preach on. And and people know that's what's going to happen every year. Well, every single year, Epic Day for them is their largest attended day of the year. And some people will say, it's because of t-shirts. You're giving away t-shirts. No. That's a part of it. They do other stuff as well, stuff for kids ministry, all kinds of, they make it eventful. We talk about eventful big days. It needs to feel like, this is something different. This needs to be the kind of thing that I want to invite my friends to. But on the teaching side, people come, or their people are more willing to invite because people know exactly where it's going to go, where it's going to teach. And in fact, that's actually something I would say for upcoming big days for you. If I was in your shoes and I was at your church, one of the things I would do is be very clear in your communication coming up to these big days, exactly where your message is going. If you're going to present the gospel on that day, I would tell people that, let your people know this is the day you want to have your people here. This is the day you want to, these are the kinds of people you want to have here. Usually the weekend or two before these big days, Christmas, Easter, maybe in Mother's Day, some people they're in the middle of January, some people there's a day in the fall, that kind of thing. Usually there's the couple weekends before that, man, there's a great opportunity to have a family conversation about, hey, why do we do Christmas? What does that look like? Why do we do Easter? Why do we make such a big deal about that? And let's talk about that and actually ultimately invite people to invite their friends. So eventful big days, we say eventful because it's not just that we want to basically build as many hooks. I think of it like a fishing analogy. We've put as many hooks in the water. What are some different things we can add to that? And over the years, if people have been criticized my leadership, it's been in the effort to try to do that. And we talked about joking about this at our, at the event we were at earlier today. We did this thing years ago where we had dancing stormtroopers, and it was super goofy and fun. It was a fun element in the service. And we told people we were going to have dancing stormtroopers. And why? Well, because if I can get people to come up for dancing stormtroopers, well, I'll know they'll hear the gospel. I know that there's other parts of the service. Obviously, it's not about the dancing stormtroopers. Right. It's about what gets them in the door. Now, you don't have to do dancing stormtroopers. I understand that there are people that are listening and they're like, that's crazy. I would never do something like that. But what you do need to do is do things on those weekends, and it can be simple stuff, photo booths. It can be, something a little bit different for your kids' ministry. And what you're doing is giving just lots of different things that your people will be more likely. You guys do the special event, every year have done in the past, the special event, even just that kind of thing, going to a new location. It's like, hey, some people don't, and we do that at one of our campuses as well. We rent out an opera house, and there's lots of people who would never be able to go to a show there. That you got mostly got to pay. Right. We run a free event, our Christmas event there. It feels very Christmassy in that location. That alone makes it an event. It feels like, oh, this is kind of a big deal that's happening here.
Yeah, and my experience is, at first when you're really putting a lot of emphasis into these big days,
yep.
It's like you're having to tell your people at the church, hey, this is a big deal.
Yep.
We're going to be able to connect with more people.
Yep.
You should invite. And then after a couple of years of that, I think your people begin to kind of get,
yes.
like you don't have to tell them anymore. They understand. Yep. Okay, at Mercy Hill, I know they're going to put a lot of emphasis on Christmas.
Yep.
And we've seen all these amazing things over the last couple of years. We tell stories of people that connected to the church at Christmas.
Yes.
And how God's used that, and they got baptized and changed their life. And that's when I think it becomes a sort of a cultural thing,
yes.
Where like for at Mercy Hill last year, I remember we've shared this a couple times, but we had really this was the third year that we'd put a really big emphasis on our Christmas services. Mm-hmm. And it was like after the 3 years, we could feel on social media and stuff like that, people that I don't even know, I see them sharing stuff about, yes. Hey, man, here's what my church's doing. Come check it out or whatever. And it's like, man, okay. When there's people that I don't even know that's sharing this stuff, right. Now you've begun to get some momentum.
Well, the interesting thing, so Christmas, Easter, Mother's Day, again.
We do back to school weekend. All of those have broader cultural, right.
You're tapping into something that's happening in the broader culture. And
right.
Isn't it interesting? It's interesting to me. Interesting, maybe more strange to me, that churches are resistant to that. Like we're right. recording this here a week after Starbucks started with the red cups. And like Starbucks rolls out the red cups on the second Tuesday of November. Every year they do that. Every second Tuesday of November, they roll out the red cups. I know a lot of worship people that resist wanting to do Christmas music. They're like, I don't want to sing Christmas music, blah, 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 Christmas music. And I'm like, listen, they turned on Christmas music over at Starbucks. They're not doing that because they love Jesus. They're doing that because they're trying to sell more coffee. Mm-hmm. And if they can do it over there, why can't we start singing Christmas music a couple weeks earlier than we normally would do? Why can't we start to build kind of momentum towards Christmas rather than, it's almost like in our culture, in our church cultures, we like roll our eyes at like, oh my goodness, it's Christmas. I'm like, hey, this is about the birth of Jesus here. Like this is a big deal. But we can miss that. We can miss the opportunity that's right in front of us. And it's the same with Easter. People are like, oh, I don't want to be, it's all about, chocolate and Easter bunnies and all that. I'm like, okay, well, they're talking about Easter. Why don't we give them an alternative? Let's kind of, go with that and lean in on that. Or, it hasn't been our case. For years, we used to say we ain't your mama's church. And turns out when you say for a long time, we ain't your mama's church, turns out you don't have great Mother's Day attendance. But Mother's Day is another one of those. It has and that's based on the idea that to all the moms, and we'll say this in our church, we'll say, if you're a mom here today, like leading up to it, if you're a mom, call your kids, invite them to come to church. Because I pretty well guarantee your kids, if you ask your kids to come on Mother's Day, they'll come because they love you, mom. They think you're great. Right. Or if you are a mom or know a mom, you should invite them to come, on Mother's Day. Because I know lots of moms out there, if you invited, they want to spend time with you, they'd do that. They'd come. Yeah. And so, let's not, again, we're just trying to leverage opportunities that we see in front of us, right?
Totally.
Hey, here's something here. Let's try to use it.
I love how you pronounce mom.
Mom.
Canadian thing.
Canadian. It's sticking out. Yeah, good.
I love that.
Tuck that back in.
The third one, captivating online conversations. Talk about that.
Yeah, so captivating online conversations. This is the idea that growing churches are leveraging their social media really to have conversation, not to just be a billboard. It's not just about, hey, we say we've got this thing coming up this weekend. We're trying to stir conversation. We're doing quotes and content that ultimately is trying to drive conversation and discussion. All of these social networks are based on the idea of interaction, trying to engage with the content. And so, if we wrote this book 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't even have this in here.
Right.
But we want to the key kind of differentiation there is we don't do, Facebook, Instagram, whatever social network you want to be, Snapchat. It's not about being a signpost. It's about how do we have conversations with people and how do we try to have, and it's really conversation at scale. How do we bring people in? And there are a lot of, lead pastors out there that resist social media because they rightfully so see the danger it's done in people's lives. And so they make which is a fair kind of conclusion. They're like, we're not getting involved in that stuff because, it's damaging people's lives. Well, we're still seeing Facebook, which everybody looks at and says like, oh, that's such an old network. But 70% of Americans check Facebook at least once a week. Think about that.
That's crazy.
If there was something in your community, if there was a restaurant in your town that 70% of your town went to every single week, the first week you might be like, well, that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of people going to that restaurant. The next week, you'd be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That something's going on there. If over time you resisted going to that restaurant and figuring out what's going on over there, I would say you're being a bad leader. You're being a bad steward. You're missing an opportunity. Rather than saying, hey, a lot of people are lining up at that restaurant over there. Maybe we should do something there. Mm-hmm. It's the same with that's just one channel, let alone, Instagram or, whatever else, whether kind of the flavor of the day.
Yeah.
We need to find a way to ultimately engage in conversation out there. And particularly, that we've done some studies on this, that lead pastors' content typically gets 5x the engagement that core accounts do. And so there's a whole conversation. That's something we could explore if you're interested, that really lead pastors particularly should be leveraging their own personal networks, their own social network, profiles to try to drive invite. So it's not don't just let the church talk about, hey, we've got this thing coming up. It's like you should be on your, and Hopper does this. I'll see him do this, sitting on his back porch. Hey, we got this thing coming up. We should be leveraging that to try to drive ultimately, it's the drive time content. There's churches that will do literally it'll be a podcast or a video feed that'll be like, hey, well, on the weekend we talked about this, but there's some other stuff we didn't get a chance to talk about. It's leveraging that kind of content to ultimately have conversations.
Yeah, I have found, because when we ask people like first-time guests at Mercy Hill, how'd you hear about Mercy Hill? We give them some options. The vast majority, 90%, is some sort of word of mouth.
Yep.
But what social media does, in my experience, is it kind of scales that word of mouth.
Yes.
100%. It's still word of mouth. Someone may check word of mouth.
Yes.
But they may have saw something on social media where you're like, hey, this message from my pastor, or hey, this thing at my church, or whatever.
Yeah, and they're tools, right? Like they're another invite tool in the belt. Like it's another each one of these. And I think we've got to train people on this stuff. It's like we will email our people. Or a good practice for your listeners would be, okay, so we release, let's say we're going into a series and we release 3 or 4 different kind of pieces of social content. Get whoever the nerdy people are in your church that look at that stuff. They'll tell you which one of these is getting the best traction. Then what we'll do is we'll email our list and say, hey, can you comment, and share on this post, please? Send this to people. Actually train them. That's the training part. This is a way you can invite people. Let me show you how to post to your stories this video, and actually show them how to do that, or do it in a service. The thing we were talking about earlier today was actually taking time in a service to do that. Actually, we're going to show you right now how to do this. Let's actually make it happen in the service right now.
That's great. That's really great. So the fourth one is magnetic community service. Yep. And I shared today at this one-day event that we were hosting through Breaking Barriers. Sometimes I'd say at Mercy Hill, we put a lot of emphasis into all these. We've not cracked the code on that one.
Yep.
And there's been seasons, in Western North Carolina, we had this terrible hurricane, and
you guys did great work around that.
yeah, and we saw a lot of what you're going to talk about here with that. We see a lot of that through our adoption foster care. You know, as we engage in the community, it does a couple things. It drives your people deeper in terms of the engagement at the church, and then it also just connects you to people that you wouldn't normally connect to. But we've not really cracked the code on that, and you know, we're still trying to do a better job at that. So talk about what you've seen churches that do that really well, like what they do.
Well, Magnetic Community Service is about positioning our church in a way that, again, it all comes back to invite, right? People at the end of the day, though, your church grows because they tell other people. People want to be a part of a church that not only is making a difference, but is seen making a difference. They want to be, people instinctively know that the church, it shouldn't just be a place where that's some people where they go and they think some ideas. Like ultimately our faith, it's James, it's our faith should work itself out in action. It should make a difference. It should, you know, when, and this would be the case with your campuses. Like if your campuses pull out of communities, those communities are going to be worse off. Like, and it's not like just worse off from a spiritual point of view. While that's true, there's other outcomes in the community that, you know, marriages are going to be more broken. You're going to have kids that are going to still need to be adopted, or foster kids that are not going to have places to stay. And so what we want to do is position our community service in a way that it invites our people to invite their friends to be a part of it. So we've seen this where, you know, you'll see churches do the like community service day where it's like, we're going to try to mobilize 50, 60% of our adults, 70, 80% of our adults to go and make a difference. Give everybody a t-shirt. We're going to go do some work in the community. It's that kind of thing. It's not only making a difference, but it's doing it in a way that it makes it easy for people to share and to invite other people to be a part of. And the hidden secret underneath all of this is these events we're increasingly seeing in a more and more post-Christian, or some would even say pre-Christian, are incredible en routes for people who don't attend church, because they look at us and say, that's a good thing. Oh, that's a good thing to be a part of. I'd like to be a part of that. I'd like to make a difference. Now we know it's a God thing. You know, you're involved in adoption and fostering, not because it's like, it's the socially right thing to do. It is the socially right thing to do, but it's like, man, God's called us to something here. This tells a bigger story. Well, we don't need to fight people on the way on what this is all about. We want to invite them to help, to be a part of that process. And the good thing is there's a number of ways to do that in a way where you can invite first-time guests to come be a part of that. I remember years ago, and you're not saying this, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but years ago I had a leader challenge me on this, and they were like, all that stuff seems like really like social justice oriented, and like, is that really what we want our church to be a part of? Like, we just want to preach the word, and like, you know, sure, we'll do great services and offer great worship experiences, and you know, we're not doing all that stuff. And I said to this leader, I said, listen, I hear what you're saying. You've got some concerns around that stuff. I understand that. I'm not debating on that. I understand all the concerns you've got around that. And there has been, you know, there have been some churches that have gone down the social justice road and have lost the message of Jesus. That's obviously
it's not the primary mission of the church.
I get that. But if I could show you statistically that doing those things are as effective as having a great band, or are as effective as doing a great job with your marketing, or if it's just at the level of having lights and smoke on a Sunday morning, would you still do it? Would you still be interested? And they're like, well, maybe. And I'm like, because it is statistically true. We'll see that time and again. There'll be a higher percentage of first-time guests if you host some sort of, and you probably saw it on the, you know, your outreach stuff that you did around the, you know, the hurricane stuff.
Right.
Like, people come out of the woodworks and they want to help. Our job is to then try to give them, like in all our other stuff, give them a clear pathway to how they get engaged in the rest of the church. Sure, you came because of this, but let's get them plugged into other stuff.
We've really seen this with the emphasis on adoption and foster care at Mercy Hill. We didn't do it for that reason at all.
No,
like, it wasn't, I wouldn't even have thought it would have any impact in that. It was way more just a theological, you know, the book of James talks about, man, you know, care about the widow. Yeah. Care about the widow and orphan, you know? And so it's like, okay, we feel like God's calling our church to really, and since we have really focused on that over the last 5 years, we have just seen so many people come to Mercy Hill, and they end up connecting and all that. They come to a weekend and we're like, hey, how'd you hear about Mercy Hill? And they're like, oh, well, you know, and we were fostering, and we met somebody else that was fostering that goes to Mercy Hill, and we didn't have a lot of support around that. And so it's crazy. I mean, I'm probably in the hundreds of people
Yep.
that have come for that reason.
Yeah, and so I would say, so that's great. What I would say is from a church growth perspective, then the question I would be asking is, okay, how do we keep doing that in a way that makes it so people will invite other people to be a part of our church in that process? How is it, what are the things that we're doing that we can empower them to invite, to not just enjoy it themselves or not just be a part of it, but actually to invite their friends to come and do these things. It's why you'll see, like, there's many churches that have done these kind of meal packing weekends where it's like, we're going to pack, and those are good things to do. They're, they are, you're passing food on to food banks or going internationally, that kind of thing. But they're a lot of fun, done well. They're a lot of fun for your people's friends to come and be a part of. Like, they're a great thing. Like, hey, I'll give an hour and a half and be a part of packing 100,000 meals. That would be amazing. Well, I'd love to be a part of that. Well, that then becomes, and I would say, and we handle it this way, if you come to one of those things, you've come to it. You've come like a new here guest. So we're going to do the exact same thing. And using your language, we would be following them up to come to the weekender. We'd be following up. You came for the first time to the meal packing thing on the weekend. You're now in our. We'd love for you to come to our weekend service. We got other stuff that's going on. It's a front door to get connected to our church.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. So the last one, appealing volunteer experience. Man, we have seen. I mean, you can't invest in that enough.
Right.
I'll let you talk about it. I mean, this is just, when we started thinking about it this way, I mean, it was, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago. I mean, we just saw major impact from this.
Yeah. The aha moment here is, and this one was late coming as I've been kind of working through church growth stuff is, and thinking about it and talking to churches that are growing and what are the actual dynamics there. And you referenced this earlier kindly, we've had a chance to talk about multi-site in the past. And like for a long time, I talked to churches about multi-site but never really stepped back and said, like, what's actually happening here from a church growth point of view? But here's the insight. Volunteer growth precedes attendance growth. So it's actually a leading measure, not a lag measure. But too many church leaders think of it as a lag measure.
It's hard for people to get their minds around this.
Yeah. They think like, okay, when we get to X number of people, and everyone has that, whatever that, when we get to 100 people, 200 people, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, like when we get there, we'll finally have enough people, like to be able to do what we need to do. But it's actually the other way around. First, what we need to do is mobilize the people who are in the fringe of our church, get them out of the stands and into the field, get them on the playing field, and they will be more likely to invite their friends. Think about it at the level of an individual, human. Someone that's not volunteering that then starts volunteering. The work that it does for them to like say, hey, they go from being, I attended, or like I went to Mercy Hill, would be the first way they say it, and then eventually like I attend Mercy Hill. But once they start volunteering, it's like, Mercy Hill is a part of what I am. Like I've got the t-shirt, like I'm on the team. It's my church. Come to my church at Mercy Hill. That kind of transition in someone's life means that they're way more likely to invite their friends. They're on Friday afternoon. It's the old water cooler Friday afternoon. Hey, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, like I'm volunteering at my church. I got this thing going on. They're way more likely. And the more people we can multiply to that, the better. I was talking to a church earlier this year. This sounds like a gold-plated problem. I was talking to a church, a very large church, name brand church. We're helping them with some stuff. And they were reflecting on in the first 2 months of 2024, they grew by 2,000 people in one of their locations.
Wow.
And they were like a little bit like, we're not sure why we grow. And so I was digging up underneath that, trying to, let's talk about that. It's an interesting problem. I'd love to know about that. And so we're talking, and at this particular church, they do Sunday mornings, Sunday evening, and they do Thursday evening services as well. And last fall, they took a strategic move and they said, we've got to make our Saturday evening services way more appealing to particularly kids. And they launched, and again, this is a gold-plated problem for people that are listening, but it's a kind of a vivid example. They launched a brand new volunteer team where they got 1,000 new volunteers in their church on this Saturday night, what they call the front porch team, which is, gathering kind of all the kind of guest services stuff. And they were 2/3 of those people had never served before in the life of the church. And I said, well, that's where your growth came from. You just moved last fall, you did all that work to get all these new volunteers onto the team. And then in this year, all of those people are now out inviting their friends to come to church. And it's almost a 3-to-1 ratio. It's almost exactly that. For every one volunteer, for every 100 volunteers you add in your church will grow by an additional 200 people. We see that time and time again. That's like an almost bankable, guaranteeable kind of number. For every one volunteer, your church will grow by 2. Down the road that you can release new into volunteering. And we see that all the time in campuses.
100%. It's counterintuitive and it's hard to wrap your mind around, but you just got to kind of believe it.
Yes,
And,
and it's hard work. I get it. It's hard because you've got to get ahead, and it's a lot of shaking hands and talking to people, and there's a whole strategy around how do we do that. But that's the mechanics under multi-site. Why, and frankly, why some campuses then, like campuses will see growth initially, we saw like an explosion. We got started with all these new people, but then why they don't see it go ongoing is because they're like, well, what are you doing to get more volunteers? How are you engaging those people? What are we doing to get them actually plugged in, people who are not serving, to get them into serving teams?
That's great, man. Yeah. We've started for our big days, like that, this is the starting point.
Yes.
Before we're telling people to invite or whatever, the starting point is, man, we need to get as many people as we can engaged and serving.
What does that look like? Like, just give me numbers-wise, percentage-wise. I heard you say this earlier today, and I wanted to ask the follow-up at that point. Like, so Christmas, I don't know when this is coming out. We're recording this before Christmas. What are you thinking? You're aiming for kind of attendance at Christmas, and then how many volunteers do you think you'll end up trying to have? What will that look like?
Yeah, so Pastor Andrew's great with this stuff of kind of, just kind of figuring out, okay, across, these last number of years, if we see 1,000 volunteers, this is, we're going to have, 5x that, that's actually going to attend.
Yep.
And you just got to kind of back into it a little bit.
Yeah. Love
and
it.
then say, he literally did this last year. Like when we started promoting for Christmas, the first thing was like, hey, in a sermon, main part of our services, like here's a whiteboard.
Right.
The last 2 Christmas services, here's how many people served. Here's how many people came. Here's how many people served. Here's how many people came. And then just say, hey, 2 Kings 4, we've got to prepare the jars and say, hey, we're praying. I think last Christmas it was either 6,000 or 7,000. We're praying for this many people. But what it's going to mean is we need this many people to serve this Christmas.
Right.
And so before we're telling people to invite or inviter cards, any of that stuff, we're starting with, man, you need to, if you're part of Mercy Hill, you need to think about serving.
So good. Love
and
that.
it just works.
Yeah,
It
love that.
It really does.
Yeah, so good.
Man, this is great. Really appreciate it. I mean, you're going to help so many people with this. And so I just really appreciate your ministry.
Oh, sweet.
Man, how can people kind of connect with you, buy the book, engage with this?
Yeah, if you go to unlockinviteculture.com, you can pick up a copy of the book, but you can just drop by our website, unseminary.com. I can give you the first couple chapters for free. I'm not really trying to sell the book. The book is a tool that hopefully will stir conversations. Like we gave away, you guys graciously bought copies for people that were here today. The goal is really not for a leader to read it by themselves. It's really trying to be, hey, here's a discussion for our whole leadership team. How could we, because it's a culture thing. It's not about an individual. This isn't the kind of thing that like a leader can say, we're doing this. It's like we kind of need our whole team in on this.
Right.
And that's whether you're, if you're a church planner, it's get your kind of core volunteers together. If you've got a few staff, get those people together. That's really what it's designed for. So yeah, I'm sure we'll link it in the show notes and all that.
Yeah. The last thing I would add, something that's been very helpful at Mercy Hill is, you can get really excited about this stuff and like, man, we're going to do a better job with this Christmas or do a better job with the sermon series at the beginning of the year. But to make this long-term, like you got to figure out how to systematize this in your staff culture.
Yes.
And that has really helped us a lot over the last 5 years. Like, man, just truly building this into our service planning process, our sermon planning process, communication and marketing, website, because the more staff you have, you may be really into this, but this person over here, so like systematizing it.
Yes.
That's how you make this stuff repeatable over a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I joked about this morning in my talk is churches grow by doing boring stuff repeatedly. Like It's like you've got to just keep on top of it. And we do these coaching cohorts where I work pretty intensely with these churches. And there was a church that took a year off because they had other stuff going on, and which is fine. They're out of the cohort, but they came back in, and literally the lead guy said to me, he's like, man, we took our eye off the ball this year. Like we just lost focus on some of this stuff, and they had other things going on, which I understand. So they're like, hey, we got to get back in, and we want to keep focused on these. You got to keep on top of it. It's not, and we're going to end with this, people wouldn't listen to this podcast if it was like, hey, I can teach your church to grow and help your church grow over 1,000 days.
Totally.
But it's going to take pressure all those 1,000 days. You got to keep working on it, week in, week out. And so stay with it, leaders. Stay focused. I love what you guys are doing here. You're doing a great job with this podcast, with the 1 days, the conference. Get leaned in, get your teams around this kind of conversation. It's easier to come to something like what you guys do and then talk about it as like, hey, what do you guys think about that? Rather than having to always be the generator of ideas. It's a super helpful thing you're doing here. And like, you don't even charge for these 1 day things. I don't know if that's going forward, but I'm like, that's crazy. Huge value. Not that I'm huge value, but like the meal and just the community is amazing. Getting around other leaders who are thinking these things, incredibly valuable for sure.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah. Our next 1 day event, we're going to be, it'll be next year in March, but we're going to be talking about, just how to create a better volunteer worship culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the, I don't know if it's post-COVID or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. So many churches struggle with, more people in your band, worship leaders, all of that. Love and we haven't cracked the code by any means, but because the amount of campuses we've been kind of forced into that. And so we want to try to help people develop that culture in their church. So, man, appreciate you guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Rich. Awesome, man.
Thanks for letting me be here.